Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Crispin, and welcome to the Week 4 live session lecture in international business. And if you're watching this recording, thank you. And for those of you who are joining a little later in this live broadcast, that's great too. In the meantime, let's get started. So it's a pleasure to welcome you to our Week 4 live session where we explore the intersection of trade and culture. And this work in the Frontier Expansion Blueprint presentation provides a solid foundation for our discussion on how global leaders navigate complex markets. So an introduction to global trade and culture, and this is our session on the dynamics of international trade and the profound impact of culture on business operations. The world trade now represents over a quarter of global wealth, as shown here in this slide, which means that you are far more likely to be involved in world trade and in international deals than previous generations. This is setting a stage of discussion on how communication between people seeking to maximize gains is the heart of the social side of business. So, for example, a leader must realize that even an initial greeting can define the success of a professional relationship. This is a pretty interesting, complex slide as well, and you may want to take a moment or two to sort of review and analyze this, because this basically takes us from mercantilism to David Ricardo's absolute advantage. And so let's look into the history of trade theory. Mercantilism once viewed trade as a zero-sum game where countries only sought to accumulate gold. Adam Smith changed this view by introducing absolute advantage, which suggests that countries should specialize in what they produce efficiently. And so then this shift allows both nations in a trade agreement to increase their total wealth. Let's talk a little more about comparative advantage from David Ricardo's theory. This concept shows that trade is still beneficial even if one country is more productive in every category than its partners. The example of England and France show how focusing on relative efficiency shows how both nations gain. And this is a key part of international business strategy because it helps managers choose the right locations for production. This talks about modern trade patterns and economies of scale. So we are now moving into modern theories like international product life cycle and economies of scale. Honda built massive facilities to reduce the cost of producing motorcycles like the Super Cub. And this illustrates how leaders use large-scale production to gain a competitive edge in global markets. Trade is not just about natural resources, but also about strategic, firm decisions. Navigating the cultural iceberg. Let's now transition into the social side of business by using the iceberg metaphor. While greetings like the Thai bow or the Maori hongi are visible, the most significant parts of culture are those hidden values and significant parts are hidden values and norms. And these shared assumptions identify what a society believes is a desirable or right. This realization is essential for avoiding workplace crisis situations while working across borders. The 3 R's of managing cultural differences. So this is a practical tool for leadership presence. The presence of recognizing cultural differences. It explains then decentering from our own habits to adapt our behavior. And finally, this is how to recenter by finding shared ground with your partners. And this approach is useful when you are trying to reach a mutually beneficial agreement in a high power distance culture where authority is viewed differently than in your home country. In this slide, you discuss cultural intelligence, or CQ. And knowing about a culture is not enough unless you have behavioral CQ to adapt your actions. Think about your own motivational CQ, which is the drive to adapt to new environments. A leader with high CQ can effectively manage strategic communication during digital engagement in unfamiliar markets. So let's now see how leaders manage global conflict. The prisoner's dilemma, where a lack of trust leads nations to use protectionist measures, like tariffs, are measurable. And the World Trade Organization is an unbiased mediator that ensures everyone plays by the same rules. For a real world example, let's point to the trade war between the United States and China as a situation where these global rules are tested. So let's apply these theories to the 66 nations identified as science and technology lagging countries. These nations, such as Angola or Bangladesh, often lack internet infrastructure and wireless connectivity. So consider the challenges of a company like Amazon would face when traditional digital engagement is not possible. This requires an executive to prioritize relationship building and face-to-face communication over standard technology. And this can also lead to market entry friction, as shown here in this slide. And the challenge is multiplicative, not additive. So it's comprehensive in its growing and building. So solving these physical logistics is useless if the host government blocks the imports or trade, or the local population rejects the business model or culture. So friction level 1 is an infrastructure void, which is one here shown in an Amazon example. And we have a short video showing that coming up here at the end of this presentation that I think you'll find interesting. Where do you go if your whole infrastructure is based on digital capacity and there is zero connectivity, logistical blind spots, and capital drain in the country? How do you get involved and engaged? Also, there could be protectionism, industry or neo-mercantilism, or administrative delay protectionism just to protect local businesses, which can also deny innovation and progress in that country. And next, there could be the cultural disconnect, just pure trust and uncertainty avoidance, like in North Korea or Iran, social stratification, and information flow. So let's bring all these concepts together. Successful international trade requires balancing economic theories with deep respect for sociocultural factors. And these are encouraging them to think like executives. You're encouraging them to think like executives who manage the workplace crisis situations and build professional relationships anywhere in the world. Examine this closely. And now let's go to a short video that talks about this digital isolation.
All right, let's dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating, incredibly high-stakes business scenario. I want you to imagine a massive digitally native corporation, let's say Amazon, deciding to expand its operations. But not just anywhere. Imagine they're trying to enter 66 very specific countries that are categorized as severely lagging in science and technology. How exactly does a company built on cutting-edge logistics and cloud computing operate in places with almost zero infrastructure? It's a massive puzzle, and it's absolutely captivating to break down. Now, you might be wondering, why would they even bother trying? Well, it comes down to the sheer scale of international business. World trade currently sits at a staggering $8 trillion. And that's not per year. That is $8 trillion every single quarter. That represents over a quarter of the entire world's GDP. So the financial incentive to tap into emerging markets is literally huge. It's exactly why global managers are constantly looking beyond their own borders, no matter how tough the terrain might be. So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to explore this global expansion scenario by breaking it down into 3 specific hurdles: technology lag, trade policies, and the cultural iceberg. After that, we'll cover managing cultural differences, and we'll wrap up with the global manager's verdict. Okay, let's jump straight into challenge 1, technology lag. So, the World Academy of Sciences, or TWAS for short, has identified 66 developing countries where science and tech capacity is significantly lagging behind. And this list isn't just pulled out of thin air. It includes the 46 least developed countries identified by the UM, plus another 20 low-income nations that really need targeted support to build up their research capacity. If you're a global manager at a place like Amazon, you're suddenly looking at establishing complex operations in places ranging from Afghanistan and Angola all the way to Bangladesh, Cambodia, Haiti, and Yemen. And here's the immediate, glaring roadblock. The baseline reality in these 66 countries is that they have little to no internet infrastructure and virtually zero wireless connectivity. Just think about that for a second. Amazon's entire ecosystem, from the one-click ordering to the warehouse robotics to AWS cloud services, it all relies on high-speed, ubiquitous internet. So how on earth do you track a package or process a basic payment in a place completely devoid of the digital backbone your whole company relies on? It requires a ground-up reimagining of the entire supply chain. Moving right along to challenge 2, trade policies. Okay, let's say Amazon magically solves the tech problem. They bring in satellite links, build physical infrastructure, the whole shebang. Even then, before a single product crosses a border, we have to talk about currency. Roughly 85% of all global trade is processed in US dollars. That is a massive chunk. It means if these 66 nations want to do business with a US-based giant like Amazon, they are fundamentally forced to build up their stock of US dollar foreign reserves. If a country runs low on dollars, doing business becomes incredibly painful, and companies are left scrambling with complex currency exchanges just to get paid. And this brings us to the broader question of why these countries even participate in global trade in the first place. Back in 1776, Adam Smith gave us the theory of absolute advantage. He argued that trade shifted the world away from a zero-sum game. You know, the idea that for every winner, there has to be a loser. He said if one country is just naturally better at producing a specific good, they should trade it. Later on, David Ricardo expanded this with comparative advantage. He showed that even if a country isn't the absolute best at something, as long as they do one thing more efficiently than another thing, trade still benefits everyone. It lifts productivity and wealth across the board. But, as we know, not every government plays by free trade rules. Amazon is definitely going to run into mercantilism. Historically, this meant a country tried to hoard wealth by strictly exporting more than it imported, literally forcing their trading partners to pay the difference in gold and silver. Today, it looks a bit different. We see neo-mercantilism, where countries deliberately run trade surpluses to fund rapid economic development or hit political goals. They do this through protectionist policies, meaning a company like Amazon could suddenly face heavily taxed imports or strict regulations designed specifically to protect local competitors. To really understand why countries lean into these protectionist policies instead of just embracing free trade, let's do a quick thought experiment. Imagine you and an accomplice get caught during a burglary. You're locked in separate interrogation rooms. The prosecutor says you can either confess or stay quiet. What do? This is the classic prisoner's dilemma, and it is the perfect way to understand the underlying tension in international trade. Let's break down the options. If you both stay quiet, which represents mutual cooperation or free trade, you each only get 1 year in prison. It is objectively the best combined outcome. But if you stay quiet and your partner confesses, meaning they use protectionist policies against you, they walk entirely free and you get slapped with 20 years. That intense fear of the 20-year penalty pushes both sides to just confess out of self-preservation, which means you both get 5 years. In the global economy, nations often default to protectionism purely out of fear. And that's exactly why groups like the World Trade Organization exist, to act as an unbiased referee, making sure everyone plays fair so we can all get that mutually beneficial 1 year outcome. Without a referee, Amazon has to anticipate a whole arsenal of government trade weapons. We're talking about tariffs, like the ones heavily used during the 2018 US-China trade war as a negotiation tactic. Then there are subsidies, where governments prop up their own local businesses with cash. You've got local content requirements, dictating that a certain chunk of a product has to be made domestically. And my personal favorite, administrative delays, which is literally just burying a foreign company in endless red tape. A global manager has to expertly dodge all of this just to get their products through the door. All right, let's talk about Challenge 3, the cultural iceberg. Even if you completely master the tech and perfectly navigate the trade policies, you still have to deal with people. Enter cross-cultural business dynamics. We can define culture as a society's unique set of values and norms that govern how people live and interact. In business, something as simple as a clumsy initial greeting can completely derail a mutually beneficial agreement. For example, if you're an Amazon rep meeting a local official, you really need to know whether to shake hands like in the West, bow like they do in Thailand, or perform a traditional Maori hongi by pressing noses together. And this leads us to a brilliant metaphor for the danger global companies face. Culture is exactly like an iceberg. The greetings, the food, the spoken language, that is just the visible tip sticking out of the water. Beneath the surface, it hides a massive, invisible base of deep-seated values, daily norms, and strict social mores. Amazon isn't just going to struggle with language barriers in these 66 nations. They're going to crash into these invisible societal backbones that are incredibly hard for an outsider to even see, let alone navigate properly. Now, these cultural norms don't just spring up out of nowhere. They're built on very real, factual, historical pillars. For starters, there are over 7,102 living languages in the world today. There are dominant religions that entirely dictate weekly work schedules. There's the local education system. And crucially, there are political and economic conditions. Take the Arab Spring back in 2011 and 2012, for example. That movement fundamentally shifted political and economic systems in places like Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Yemen. A company expanding there absolutely has to understand how those recent historical events reshaped the values and the risk tolerance of the exact people they want to hire. To actually make sense of all this, businesses look at what we call cultural dimensions. Just think about the wild variety of workplace mindsets an Amazon manager is going to run into. You have power distance. Do employees expect to be told exactly what to do, or is it normal to challenge the boss? There's individualism versus collectivism. Are we grinding for personal bonuses or for the greater good of the community? Uncertainty avoidance measures how stressed a culture gets about the unknown, and future orientation looks at whether a society values immediate, quick results over long-term planning. You can clearly see how trying to force a one-size-fits-all management style across 66 wildly different countries would just be a total disaster. So, that brings us to managing cultural differences. How does a global manager actually survive and thrive in the middle of all this? Well, let's get into some actionable solutions. The key here is utilizing what we call the 3 R's, with a heavy focus on decentering and recentering. Decentering is taking what you've learned about this brand new culture and actively adapting your own behavior and mindset to match it. But you can't just lose your own corporate identity entirely, right? Which brings us to recentering. This is the art of finding or creating shared ground between your old way of doing things and the new cultural reality. It's essentially about meeting in the middle to get the job done effectively. To pull that off, professionals have to actively build their cultural intelligence, or CQ. This takes cognitive understanding, behavioral adaptation, and a lot of motivational drive. The framework to do this is actually pretty straightforward. Step 1, identify your personal CQ strengths and weaknesses. Like, do you understand the culture on paper, but lack the actual drive to adapt your behavior? Step 2, select and apply training that targets those specific weaknesses. And step 3, organize your daily tasks so they align with that training, turning it into second nature. This right here is the absolute playbook for making sure a cultural misunderstanding doesn't tank a multi-million-dollar expansion. Wow, okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We've seen firsthand how international business is about so much more than just having a good product to sell. Facing environments with absolute zero internet infrastructure, navigating countries locked in a 20-year prisoner's dilemma of protectionist trade barriers, and desperately trying not to sink your company on deep, invisible cultural icebergs, it is a monumental task. So knowing all of this, I want to leave you with a question. If you were the CEO, armed with all this data, how would you time your entry into these 66 markets? Would you dive in right now to claim that absolute advantage, or would you sit on the sidelines and wait? Definitely something to chew on as you navigate the fascinating world of global business.
So you can see that being an international leader and strategist for your company or a CEO is a very complex uh, endeavor, and it requires utilizing these international business theories and knowing what they're supposed to do so that you could create strategies accordingly and having a high cultural CQ. So anyway, that concludes our presentation for today. And I want to thank you all for watching this recording. And if you have any questions, remember, you can always contact me and I'll be happy to respond. And in the meantime, I'll see you in class. Bye, everybody. Stay safe.